Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be talking about something that might be a little bit uncomfortable,
Yeah?
but we're going to do it anyway. We're going to be talking about indifference in relationships.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. And we're going to be really kind of peeling back the layers on this and going beyond just the surface level,
Right.
disagreements and arguments, and really talking about how this sort of seemingly passive emotion can actually be a really big red flag.
It's true. It can be super subtle, like a slow leak, you know?
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
notice it at first, and then all of a sudden you're stranded.
Exactly. And to help us navigate this topic, we are going to be taking a look at an article from Future Strong Academy called How Men and Women Display Their Indifference Can Be a Prelude to Separation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So by the end of this deep dive, hopefully you'll kind of have this new lens for understanding how men and women might actually express and experience indifference differently,
Yeah.
and what those subtle signs might be telling you about your own relationships. What do you think about that?
I think it's a great topic. And I think it's really interesting that the article points to this rise in gray divorce.
Right.
Where couples who have been together for a really long time, sometimes decades.
But what I also found really interesting in this article is how it points to the fact that men and women might actually experience indifference in fundamentally different ways.
Interesting.
They even talk about the biology of it and bring in this concept of serotonin.
Serotonin, right? The motivation hormone.
Right.
Yeah. Well, men actually have twice the amount of serotonin receptors as women.
Oh, wow.
And that means they might react much more strongly when they aren't getting enough positive feedback in a relationship.
Hold on. So you're saying just because of this biological difference, something that, I might perceive as my partner just being tired after a long day, could actually be him feeling emotionally neglected because of this difference in serotonin.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. And it's not to say that women don't experience indifference just as intensely.
Right.
But the way they experience it and how intensely they feel, it might be influenced by this biological difference.
Wow. That's a really interesting point. It kind of makes me think about, how many times I might have misinterpreted, my partner's behavior or something. But wait, there's even more, right?
There is.
The article goes on to explore how societal expectations play a role, too.
Absolutely. I mean, just think about it for a second. Traditionally, men have always been encouraged to focus on their careers, especially in their 20s and 30s. And so they receive a lot of validation from those achievements.
Yeah.
And I think in a way that can shape their perception of self-worth and how they view a lack of positive feedback from their partner.
Interesting. So you're saying a man's sense of validation that he gets from his career might actually make him more sensitive to feeling undervalued in his relationship.
It's certainly a possibility.
I never thought about it that way. It's really interesting.
It's really not about pointing fingers.
Right.
It's more about understanding this whole complex web of influences that shape how we respond to things emotionally.
That's a really good point. But I am curious about one thing. If men have this biological difference in serotonin, wouldn't that affect all the areas of their life and not just romantic relationships?
You're right to point that out. That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think the key here is to remember that we're specifically talking about romantic relationships.
Okay.
Because with those relationships come this expectation of a much deeper level of emotional intimacy and support.
Right.
So while a man might not be as sensitive to not getting positive feedback at work, let's say,
Okay.
when it comes to his romantic relationships, it can feel much more personal and therefore have a much bigger impact.
Yeah. I'm starting to see how all of these factors can really create this kind of perfect storm for misunderstanding in a relationship.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm glad that the article didn't just leave us hanging there.
Yeah.
It really emphasized how important it is to have open and honest communication, especially as couples are navigating all the changes that come with midlife and beyond. And, this isn't just about airing your grievances. This is about really trying to understand where your partner is coming from, what their needs and aspirations are, and really figuring out if you're both still on the same path.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious to kind of get into the practicalities of how to actually improve communication in a relationship where things have already started to feel a little indifferent.
Yeah, me too.
Where do you even begin?
Well, that's a great place to start talking about the next part of the article.
Okay, let's do it.
You're hitting on a really important point here. It's one thing to be able to recognize the signs of indifference and figure out what's causing it. But it's a whole other thing to figure out what to actually do about it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, where do you even start?
Well, the article talks about shifting from this kind of like reactive communication where you're only addressing problems when they like explode,
Right.
to something called proactive communication.
Okay, proactive communication. So what does that actually look like? I mean, are we talking like scheduled date nights, or is there something more to it than that?
It's more about creating a space where you and your partner can regularly have honest conversations about your individual needs and feelings.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about like, who's picking up the kids from school or what are we having for dinner.
Right.
This is about sharing your deeper hopes and fears, your dreams for the future, the things that can easily get lost in the day-to-day.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I get that. But, I can imagine that those conversations could be kind of tough, especially if you're already feeling a bit disconnected from your partner.
Oh, for sure. It
Yeah.
can be tricky. But there are definitely things you can do to make those conversations more productive and, less likely to turn into an argument.
No, I'm all ears.
One thing that really helps is to use I statements instead of you statements.
Yeah.
So, for example, instead of saying something like, you never listened to me,
Yeah.
you could say, I feel unheard when. You see how that shifts the focus from blame to just expressing your own experience.
That's a really good tip. And something that I personally struggle with is really listening without getting defensive.
Yeah, that's a common one.
Do you have any advice for that?
Well, it all comes down to active listening. Really making an effort to hear what your partner is saying without interrupting or like already thinking about what you're going to say back to them.
Right.
One trick that I find helpful is to actually repeat back what you heard them say,
Okay.
just to make sure you understood them correctly.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised how much that one little thing can diffuse tension and help you both feel heard.
I love that. It's so simple, but it makes so much sense. And it really ties into this bigger idea that the article talks about, which is remembering that relationships are a two-way street.
Exactly.
It's not just about getting your own needs met.
Right.
It's about being able to understand and support your partner's needs too.
Absolutely. And, as we talked about earlier, those needs can change and evolve over time. What was important to you and your partner in your 20s might not be so important in your 50s.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Right.
But you have to regularly check in with each other. Not just about the day-to-day stuff, but about those bigger hopes and dreams.
Yeah.
That's how you make sure you're growing together and not drifting apart.
Something that struck me about this article is that they don't frame communication as being solely about like saving the relationship.
That's right.
They actually acknowledge that sometimes no matter how hard you try, you and your partner might just be growing in different directions.
It happens.
And they say that in those cases, having good communication can actually make the process of separating a lot less painful.
Yeah.
Because it allows for a more amicable parting.
Right.
Where you can acknowledge the history you've shared and move forward with more understanding and respect.
That's a really important point. It kind of changes the whole conversation around communication.
Right.
It's not just about fixing what's broken. It's about figuring out how to navigate the evolution of the relationship.
Yeah. Whether that means reconnecting on a deeper level or deciding to consciously uncouple.
Exactly. And it reinforces this idea that even when a relationship ends, communication can still be such a powerful tool for healing and growth.
Wow, we've really covered a lot of ground in this conversation.
We have.
From the biological and societal factors that play a role in how men and women experience indifference differently, to how communication breaks down, and then ultimately the importance of proactive and empathetic communication. What stands out to you as the most important takeaway for our listeners so far? For me, it's that reminder that indifference isn't really the problem itself. It's more like a symptom of something else.
Right.
It's a sign that something bigger is going on, Right. Maybe there are some unmet needs or expectations aren't aligning, or maybe you've just stopped communicating as well as you used to.
Right.
But the good news is we can actually do something about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think what's so interesting about this article is how it really pushes us to look beyond just those surface level behaviors.
Yeah.
And to really try to understand what's going on emotionally in our relationships.
Yeah.
It's like a call to be more mindful, more curious, and more proactive about really nurturing those connections.
It really is. And it's like we've been given this whole new way of looking at our relationships. And while we've been talking about romantic relationships specifically today,
Right.
I can't help but think that a lot of these insights could apply to other kinds of relationships too. Like friendships, family dynamics, even professional relationships.
I think you've hit on something really important about human connection there.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter if we're talking about a romantic partner, a close friend, or a colleague. We all have that same basic need for communication and understanding,
Right.
and a willingness to kind of adapt as things change, because we're all constantly evolving as individuals.
Exactly. And those changes are going to affect our relationships in some way. So
Yeah.
it's not about finding that like perfect person or that perfect relationship. It's more about making the choice to show up, to engage, and to keep those lines of communication open as we grow and change.
You got it. And the really cool thing is that even small efforts can make a huge difference.
That's true.
Just checking in with someone, having a real conversation, really listening to what they have to say. Those little things can be so powerful when it comes to stopping indifference from taking root.
This has been such a great conversation. I feel like I have a totally different perspective on indifference now, you know?
Yes, too.
It's not just this negative emotion that we need to avoid.
Right.
It can actually be an opportunity to grow and to build deeper connections.
That's the power of understanding things better.
It is.
We can move beyond just those simple labels and really start to dig into the nuances of how we behave and why.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've just about reached the end of our deep dive today.
I think so.
Is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with today?
You know, I really hope that this conversation will inspire them to have those important conversations, to ask those tough questions,
Yeah.
and to approach their relationships with more awareness and a commitment to open communication.
That's great advice.
Remember, relationships thrive on understanding, empathy, and growing together. So don't let indifference become that wedge that drives you apart.
That's such a good point.
Use it as a chance to build stronger, more fulfilling connections.
I love that. That is a perfect note to end on, I think.
So that's it for this deep dive into indifference.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Until next time, keep those conversations flowing and those connections strong.